Welcome to the ISG Smart Talk, Life Science Bot 2.0 and Bot 3.0, Are You Ready? Where we will share the latest trends and case studies from the convergence of robotic and cognitive process automation, why you need a bot vision, and how to scale your automation program. Our hosts for today's talk are ISG Global Partner and RPA Practice Lead, Mark Davison, ISG Partner and Life Science Practice Lead, Jennifer Stein, and ISG Director and Digital Drug Development Practice Lead, Francis Grote. ISG's robotic process automation team helps customers and service providers navigate the myriad risks and seize the significant transformational opportunities offered by robotics and automation. And our life science experts can help you look holistically for cost savings, efficiency improvements, and increased productivity, and identify and implement strategies to put your organization in a place to get the most you can from automation. This ISG Smart Talk is being recorded, and the replay will be available to share with your colleagues at the same link as the live event you're listening to now. Following the presentation, there will be a brief Q&A session. Feel free to submit a question at any time during the presentation by using the Ask a Question box on the left side of this window. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, or you are listening to a recording of this broadcast, we will answer your questions in a follow-up email. With that, I will hand things over to Jen Stein to kick off today's ISG Smart Talk.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining our Life Science Smart Talk event. We're going to kick off our session today with a survey question. So Chris, I'd like to ask you to take us to the survey question, and we're asking for audience participation here. Okay, Chris. All right, our survey question is, how would you rate your organization's readiness for automation? A, are you very well informed and ready? B, somewhat well informed and ready? Or C, not ready to start yet? So while we wait for the results to come in, I'd like to highlight what we see as the top 3 areas life science companies are automating today. The first area, hands down, is the back office. And by back office, I mean procurement, finance, IT. The second area we see traction is pharmacovigilance and safety. And the third area would be clinical trials. All right, it looks like our survey results are in, and very good, perfect. We have our answer as B, somewhat well-informed and ready. So with that backdrop, what I'd like to do next is turn things over to Mark Davison.
Thank you, Jen. And Jen, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great, Mark.
Quick sound check. Thank you. And hello, everybody. This is Mark Davison with ISG, already introduced by Chris. I am responsible globally for our robotic process and cognitive automation practice. And I want to take us to the next couple of slides and introduce our topic today. And I would agree with the audience, just my own observation, and I think we have a slide in here about kind of a quick status check of our own client base, where people stand in terms of their views on that question, and it would seem to resonate with the results that we have. I turn to the agenda page, just a quick review of where we're going today to make this as most valuable as we can for everybody's time. A little bit of talk about what we call Bot 2.0 and 3.0. Then I think some trends in automation. Everybody's always interested in what others are doing. Where's the technology going? That's sections 2 and 3 today. And then the last part is kind of the climax of it all, which is if you're thinking about Bot 2.0 and Bot 3.0, how do I get there? How do I actually do this? How do I invest resources? How do I optimize returns? How do I marshal the resources and the plan to drive my operation and my organization in the right direction? So let's get on with the first part. What is Bot 2.0 and 3.0? Well, it really starts with an understanding of where we came from in a way in automation. And that's what this slide shows. If we go back to 1995, and this slide we use typically with clients and in public sessions just to talk about waves of automation. Nothing new here, most people this resonates with, but you go back to the 90s and think about, well, gee, what was happening? Digitization, right? Networking, connecting things up, things going digital, computers getting a lot faster. Certainly, there's no question the advent of microprocessing technology, driving things smaller and faster. And that, of course, led to the second phase, which is connecting consumers. Think about your own experience. When did you get on the internet? When did you get email? When did you get capabilities of your own, maybe your own personal phone? Before you had a mobile device, you had a flip-up phone. When did you get that? Probably about this time, right? It became the connecting of the consumers, and it gave way then to tremendous information flows between consumers and businesses. So you can see here social networking and, of course, information sharing. And where are we today? Where are we going? Well, of course, everybody knows about the Internet of Things, but in business today, it really is the rapid adoption of automation. And what's happened is some of these tools, as I think many of you know, have become so relatively easy to use compared to their predecessors of the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s, that adoption it's like a no-brainer in some cases. And so you can see on the bottom of the screen some of the disruptors and the disrupted. It's always interesting to look back on some of those companies and see where they are. And in most cases, I would say, all of this will resonate with everybody. You recognize the emblems of the companies. Now the thing is to overlay from a commercial standpoint, from a business standpoint, what about automation? What about bots? So if I take you to the evolution of bots, within our own firm, we talk to clients about bot 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So what's bot 1.0? And by the way, no commentary here about what anybody is. We see clients in all stages of bot evolution. Bot 1.0, we typically see clients in this phase where they're laying the groundwork for automation. They haven't matured yet. Maybe they're doing assessments or proof of concepts. They're selecting a tool. They're just getting their center of excellence up and running. It's really the starting of the journey and the laying of the groundwork for future automation, which leads to bot 2.0, right? Bot 2.0 is some level of maturity here. The COE is up and running. There's staff in it. They've adopted best practices and frameworks for building automated processes, for supporting them. The number of automations in the organization has grown. They're beginning to think about, well, gee, this is going to be something substantial. I didn't really think about it, but when I started this, I was thinking, well, gee, we'll just automate a few processes. Now I could have 500 or 1,000 bots or virtual workers in my company. How do I support that? How do I maintain that? And they're beginning to think about also, where do I go from here? If I lay a foundation of robotics, what can I do later? What kind of smarter technologies can I use? What kind of cognitive or even autonomic or artificial intelligence applications can I use? And that begins to lay the next steps to get to bot 3.0. And bot 3.0 is experimentation and the utilization of more advanced or smarter intelligent technologies. No question about the expansion of RPA. It's vertical and horizontal in the business. It may have started in shared services, as Jen mentioned, but now it's branching out into operational areas, manufacturing areas. Could include integration into digital strategies, engagement, which I have with my suppliers and customers, and it can also be going vertically. It may have started in one vertical function, say in one tower, maybe procure to pay, in certain what I would call routine, repetitive, recurring processes. But now I've automated that, and I want to go deeper. I want to use different technologies to really try to automate and get beyond the base level of automation. So that's 3.0. And what's behind that is on this slide. Why the drive? Okay, and there's no question, there's many reasons, by the way. But these three, again, survey of our own clients, what we see in the market, and prospective clients that we talk to all the time, conferences we present at, customer engagement, cost management, innovation, and growth in revenue are the three buckets that we tend to put these in. And again, you can look at this slide and you can say, gee, it makes sense. But it is true in a sense, right? Customer engagement. Customers want results and they want it fast. How do we do that? We engage them digitally. We craft a user experience that provides the kind of responsiveness that they say they need and they say they want. We build loyalty programs. Cost management, right? We use automation to drive cost out of the back office. But it might not be hard costs. Sometimes it's soft costs. Sometimes it's improved quality through less data entry areas. Sometimes it's improved compliance, because robotics complies with process typically more consistently than humans. And sometimes, by the way, it's pure productivity because the automations function faster than humans can do the work. Then on the last column about innovation and growth, this now tackles the other side of it, which is how do I grow my revenue? How do I take the other side of the business and make it better? So how do I introduce new products and services that are tied to or linked with automation? How do I engage my supply chain through e-commerce and so forth? And also, how do I improve customer service? Before I leave this slide, that's a whole other area. And how do I connect that customer service data into the other data in my company so I can really leverage the entire automation experience to drive the business ahead? And this slide it brings me back to this slide, and it resonates a couple of thoughts with me. One is, where's the impact? Well, this slide kind of shows the work of a firm from R&D pushing through left to right out to the consumer. Where does ultimately Bot 3.0 touch? Well, you wouldn't be surprised to see diamonds everywhere, because ultimately, if the people on this call share the vision of many of our other clients and many of us in the firm who work in this area, Bot 3.0 will touch everything. Think about it for a moment. This is all connected already, right? If we're not connected through our internal networks, we have external network connectivity that allows us to reach up and down the supply chain, out to our customers, and back. Think about the applications. Many of them are islands of automation. They're not necessarily connected to the whole, but they will be, they can be, and ultimately they probably have to be. To gather the right data and get a look at our customers and our operational data and our results in real time so we can really plan out where we need to go as a business. So this chart is just a vision, and it's going to drive some thoughts later in the discussion. Underlying this chart, though, 4 key things. And some of these are takeaways for everybody on the call. This is one of those slides. If you think about it, what's driving the need? One is increased availability, right? We're all connected in some way, form, or fashion. Yes, there's security. Yes, there are privacy rules. There's all kinds of rules and regulations and guidelines around how we're connected. But we are connected. We can act because we've got real-time data coming in. The connectedness allows us to collaborate electronically and instantaneously. And of course, that facilitates analysis. We're gathering more and more data than we ever have in business. And that allows us to be much keener about analysis. And there's great analysis tools that can be used. Which leads us to how we get to Bot 3.0. In this slide right here, on the left, it has a great circle of the digital future. It's a ton of, I would say, parameters or factors to look at, but all summarized on the right. What are we looking at in 3.0? Well, obviously, technology that facilitates flexibility and agility, right? We need a combination, we will have a combination of robotic and cognitive solutions. Tools that allow us to experiment so we can fail fast. It's almost trite to say that, but it does work. Get something out there, fail fast, don't invest a lot in it. We tried it. Now let's go to the next level of learning. Analysis, how do we analyze this? These robotics will throw off great statistical data and actual data we can use instead of just anecdotal. Integrating, we'll be using these tools to integrate applications and systems, and also machine data. And finally, remote monitoring. So 24/7 support. So the automations, the tools, they never stop. When data comes in, they work. When observations are made, they work. When we have inputs, generally speaking, they work. So how do I think about this? Well, at ISG, we frame this up in a couple of ways. And I'm going to show you a series of slides here. Then I'm going to hand off to Fran, who's going to talk specifically about some life sciences experiences. This slide we typically use when we express to others our view of the market. And we have as a firm, we have a very, very definite view of the market. There are robotic technologies, there are autonomic technologies, and there are cognitive technologies. And many of you on the call probably are already familiar with these, but just quickly, robotics, we're using tools that are dealing with repetitive, recurring, repeatable manual processes typically, and we're automating them. We build a script more or less, and they follow it. In the middle, or actually the right 2 columns, now are building in intelligence. And the differentiation with these tools is, while they may follow a script, and they often do, they also are analyzing trends and patterns in the data in the background, and they're using that to take an unscripted step. So they can make a recommendation to a human about an action to take, or in some cases, they can take their own action. The autonomic tools in that column, typically IT tools, the cognitive tools, machine learning, and other applications, typically for the business. And you can see at the bottom some of the products in the market that we're monitoring. We monitor over 100 companies in this space. We work with many of them. Just some of the examples that we often call out. You can see in the RPA space, the 3 pure play RPA leaders. Over here in the cognitive space, some examples of some cognitive products. IPsoft's IP Center kind of being the elephant in the space in the pure play space. And then over here on the right, under the cognitive space, some machine learning tools like Cognitive Scale and IBM Watson and Reinfer, Amelia, which is an IPsoft tool as well, and then Abby, which is in Datamatics, which offer intelligent character recognition solutions. We have another view of this with clients that say to us, well, give us some examples of cognitive technologies and robotics and how they stack up. So this slide has a lot of detail on it. I suspect that most of you are familiar with some of these technologies, if not all of them, because there's so much discussion around them. Of course, robotic process automation on the left, but image recognition, natural language processing, cognitive reasoning, conversational AI, data extraction, natural language generation. These are different categories of tools, and you can see here some of the examples of tools that we often refer clients to. You can see some of the ones at the bottom that I mentioned. No question, Watson, if you're not using it, you've seen the commercials about Watson. Celoton, you may be aware of. It's a very nice tool to take unstructured data into structured. And you can move on from left to right and see some of the tools that are being used. There's many, many tools, and every day there's new companies that come out with tools. The important thing is to recognize what the areas of technology are and be thinking about those as you think about your strategy to get to Bot 3.0, Which leads me to this slide. And you might remember that I want to talk about the technology for just a minute on these last 2 slides in this section, then I'll hand it over to Fran. If you now take a technology standpoint and you think to yourself, well, how does all this stuff work together? Think of it this way. I mentioned earlier that the robotic process automation creates a foundational layer for automation in the business. And this chart, it's shown in the light blue layer at the bottom. But there are things that robotic process automation can't address. And they're typically the non-routine, non-repetitive, non-recurring, more thoughtful, I sometimes say brainier or thoughtful actions that people take. And so those are exceptions. And as experience will tell you, as it tells us, not every process, few processes, if any, can be automated 100%. There's always exceptions or escalations. There's always work humans have to do on a part of a process. Those become escalations out of RPA into humans. Well, many of those can be automated through cognitive solutions. That's the dark blue layer here. And so if you think about that as sitting on top of your robotic process solutions, then what comes out the top are really the true human escalations. It's a view of the technology of the marrying of those two with humans working with them. Our point of view is that there's a lot of machine-human interaction here. Robots and cognitive don't always displace humans 100%. And of course, we see that in most of our clients. The last slide in this section gives you a picture of what a technology architecture might be in a business. And it's really the crowning of today's current architecture with robotic and cognitive automation tools. But most companies have a very bottom layer that at this point is really commodity, right? It's infrastructure, it's servers, it's routers, it's gateways, it's networks. It's the plumbing, if you will. Above that sit the business process applications and the BI applications. And then on top of that, of course, is where you would place your robotic process and automation tool, your cognitive automation tools. One thing this diagram doesn't show is the fingers. We call them the fingers, the reach out of these platforms, because they have the ability to come down the triangle now and reach fingers into the systems and applications that are in the middle layer and into, by the way, the bottom layer to grab data and to use it in the automated processes to generate outcomes. So at this point, I'm going to conclude this section, and I'm going to hand it over to Fran Grote Fran is one of our subject matter experts, with her specialty being in this space, the life sciences space. So Fran, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about trends in automation and life sciences.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for that really informative overview about where we have come and where we're going in terms of automation. I'd like to kick off this next section before we start with another survey. So, Chris, if you can launch survey question number 2. The question is, how high of a priority is process improvement to your organization? And the choices are A, a very high priority. We have a program in place with staff to support it. B, somewhat of a priority. We have ongoing projects but no overarching efforts underway. Or C, not yet prioritized. We take advantage of process improvements on an ad hoc basis. So we'll give people a few moments to indicate their selection there. And I am guessing we're just about done getting responses back, maybe not. So I have to say that I'm not surprised to see that it is, for most respondents, a very high priority. I think especially in the life sciences, where funding is getting tighter and tighter, the need to get more results with less spend is pretty much universal. And there's a big focus on efficiency that most companies have a pretty high priority on process improvement. But what we are seeing, not surprisingly, is that despite the fact that there are often dedicated process improvement teams or project offices, it's quite challenging to make those big organizational leaps that actually deliver the kinds of efficiencies that companies are looking for in terms of process improvement. And the one area where we really are seeing that return on investment delivering to expectations on a very predictable basis is around the use of automation and the use of those bot processes. So if we flip back to the slides now, talking about the trends in life sciences, I'll first talk about some industry-level trends and then talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in terms of the trends in technology. So at the industry level, there's really that focus on the overarching ability to deliver compliance and to ensure quality. And GDPR, which is now in place in Europe, is really focusing everybody on data protection and, as an outflow of that data protection, how to ensure that systems are secure and compliant. And additional compliance risk is in the area of clinical drug development. So patient data in particular is an area of huge focus. It has been for quite some time and continues to be. The other thing that we are seeing a lot of focus on quality and compliance is around patient centricity and outcome-driven models. So pharma companies for quite some years now have been investing in those patient-centric models of drug discovery to post-market disease management. And what we're finding is that bringing real-world data into clinical trials, although it's extremely interesting for many of our sponsors, there is not yet a standard approach to doing that. So although the results have to meet regulatory standards, there's not necessarily regulatory guidance on how to collect those results. And then finally, the adoption of digital technology beyond the clinical trials is really going to things like supply chain and understanding the biological and environmental factors that contribute to rare diseases. So as Mark said previously, just about every day we're seeing new players coming into this space with very interesting new technologies. The challenges that we're running into are validating those technologies both in and of themselves and within the larger validation requirements of our clients. And if you look at the charts across the bottom, the digital opportunity is relatively high in each of these three trend areas, but the adoption rate, except in the blockchain and supply chain management, is really kind of lagging behind what the opportunity is. Another area where we're seeing some trends in the life sciences are with pricing pressures. So not surprisingly, going back to what I said a moment ago, companies are facing increasing pressure to deliver more for less. And so the focus on improving R&D productivity is extremely high. People are still looking for outsourced solutions as one of the potential ways to increase the productivity, get more value for the dollar. But what more and more of our clients are beginning to look at is it time to begin repatriating some of those activities that used to be more cost-effective to outsource, but with the implementation of new technologies might actually be more cost-efficient to bring back in-house. Now that they've figured out how to recognize those improvement opportunities, it might just be time to look at how to maximize those themselves. Asia, as has been the case for over a decade now, remains a true innovation hub. But what is new and different in the last few years is that the discovery part of R&D and competitive innovation is really increasing in much of the Asian market as well as in India. So R&D funding coming out of those geographies is on the increase as opposed to being on the decrease in the more Western markets. And then finally, value chain integration across the business model is really huge. So companies are beginning to understand that you get the most bang for your buck when you look at how you are investing your money across your entire enterprise. And outcome-based models are driving where investments are being made. So the adoption level for these kinds of trends, again, is a little bit higher than what we actually see historically. Companies are beginning to truly focus on their opportunities in this space. If we look at the technology trends, the big question, of course, is where does digital fit into all of this? So we have virtual clinical trials being something that almost every company is looking at. And these are very often hybrid trials. So except in the post-marketing space, we have not necessarily seen a truly 100% virtual clinical trial because the need to actually have healthcare providers assess patient outcomes is never going to go away. That's a regulatory requirement. But we are seeing a great deal more of the use of cloud technology. Of course, electronic data capture is foundational to all studies now. And analytics and wearables coming into the data stream feed are a huge trend. We're also seeing blockchain being adopted. Of course, in the supply chain, it was adopted, kind of historically, but now within the clinical trial realm and the data analytics realm, people are beginning to look at opportunities to leverage what blockchain can provide in terms of data security and data quality. And then, of course, we have the DSCSA regulations, which just came into effect last year, and are requiring companies to be able to demonstrate that you can track what you are manufacturing and providing to the public from where it's generated all the way through where it's being utilized and distributed. So serialization is huge there. The digital opportunity here is still growing. So frankly, except in the case of serialization, there aren't all that many players who are ready for prime time. But again, not surprisingly, because the life sciences industry tends to be somewhat conservative in its adoption of these new technologies, adoption is lagging behind what's actually available in the marketplace. And then finally, when we look at artificial intelligence and analytics from wearables and other emerging technologies, we see that there is quite a bit of interest across our clients in how to utilize these things and make the most of them, and that the historical rate of adoption was actually pretty high. So people were interested, they remain interested, and I think what many of our clients are waiting for is the technology to catch up the actual ideas they have about how it might be able to be used. So companies are looking at AI to expedite the process from drug discovery to commercialization, and investments in AI are growing. wearable data is a hot topic right now. People are extremely interested in what they can get from real life and outcomes experience by using wearable data. And other emerging technologies are modelings and simulations, the uses of big data and how to analyze that and get value out of it. And then finally, just the techniques and streams to aid the life science industry in drug discovery. So with that, I would encourage people, if you have questions, to submit them through the system. We'll be happy to speak to them later. And I'd like to hand it back over to Jen now.
Thanks, Fran. Okay, we're going to ask for some interaction again, and we have a third survey question. So the survey question is, how high of a priority is process improvement in your organization? A, is it a very high priority? We have programs in place to staff and support it. B,
Jen, sorry to interrupt. I think that was the last question. You might want to look at what are your biggest concerns about using automation solutions?
Thanks, Fran.
Sure.
Chris, can you take us to the next survey? What are your biggest concerns about automation solutions? A, my organization doesn't know enough about the solution. B, my organization feels the level of risk is too high. C, my organization is not convinced there's a significant business benefit to cover the cost of implementation. Or D, the level of change management required is more than my organization can manage right now. Okay, Chris, I can't see the survey results, but if you want them to read them back to me.
Yep, we have 33% chose A. My organization doesn't know enough about these solutions, and 66% my organization is not convinced there's sufficient business benefit to cover the costs of the implementation.
Okay. All right, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. The trend that we've seen over the last 2 years is the life science companies have been focused on really evaluating the cost to implement by launching assessments and kicking off implementations of automation solutions, where the focus now is many life science companies are well on their way in their automation journey, and the business is demanding faster and faster deployment, leading us to a focus on change management. So with that, we're going to start our next section. I'm going to turn back over to Mark.
Thank you, Jen. Yep, thank you, Jen. I got the helm. Thank you very much. So I thought it was interesting on the survey, and I totally feel the same thing from the prospective clients and clients that we speak to about, is there a business benefit? If I invest money in these cognitive platforms, or any platform, is my business going to benefit? So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's go to, and it'll be a theme when we get to the strategy part of the discussion as well. Just surveying across the number of our own clients, where is automation being used? So here's some examples, and again, we wanted this to be a takeaway for everybody. But and I'm not a slide reader, so I'll skip through a couple, and then if we have questions, we can answer them specifically. Fran talked about some of the digital product opportunities with personalized care, but there's other things. I like this social media listening one. We have a couple of clients that are using the technology to quote unquote listen and monitor what's happening in social media with regard to their company, their products, customer results. Everybody knows they can go on Expedia and put a comment up there about where you went on your most recent vacation. Same kind of thing. You never know where somebody might put something up there about your company or product. There's a use for this also on the financial side. I don't think we have it listed here, but talking about, we have a client also that does the same kind of thing, monitoring for financial announcements for their customers and their suppliers. So are they having good success financially? Are they filing for bankruptcy? And so forth and so on. That's a pretty common application at this point. So that's another use of the social media monitoring. Innovation's a big one as well. There's a lot of talk about IoT, and I won't talk about that. But the bioinformatics is an interesting one. That's using voice or some other kind of biological identifier. Sometimes it could be eyes, it could be fingerprints, to identify a user or provide security access or authorization to something, to a system, to data, to providing a response to a survey, to some kind of participation. So that's one that we see coming in a little bit from left field. We in our own days, in our own work, we see it a bit anyway, right? We have voice recognition. We call into a system, it wants to identify our voice, or maybe you're using at the airport not the TSA pre-check, but the Clear, where you put your fingerprints on. That's just another version of this. Thinking about, well, how can I provide greater security or greater control over access and authorization? If I skip over to the back office column, I'm not going to skip over RPA, but RPA clearly is one of those technologies that has the potential to help people automate and scale fast across the enterprise, drive cost savings, improve quality, and improve productivity, and so forth. When we talk about cognitive, though, that's where we actually get a lot of questions about, where is the payback? And it's true. A lot of times you have to look or you have to run a cognitive application longer than you would expect to generate a payback or a return. Sometimes they're soft, but sometimes they're very noticeable not just because humans aren't doing the work, but because things get done faster and better and quicker. So OCR is an example, modern tools that can ingest unstructured data and do auto-classification, auto-structure of the data with minimal human intervention. Chatbots is another area, both internal and external use, by the way. So using them with customers and suppliers, as well as internally for internal customer service to query data and get responses back. Fran mentioned about blockchain. That's another technology that's coming from outside the industry in many cases, but gaining traction quickly. And we won't be talking about that in depth on this conference call, but we'll be talking about it at our annual Automation Summit, which is coming up in New York in July. And if you'd like more information about that, you can go to our website and look under events. Well, we'd love to have everybody join us for that meeting, for that summit, and then also for the blockchain conversation. Skipping over to IT, and just to spend a moment here, IT in this industry in life sciences is not unlike many other industries in a very basic way. There's DevOps. There's a need to provide automation to the operational side of the house and to automate what we can in development and administration. There's also service desk automation. And I know a lot of firms, most firms in this space have automation. The question is, amongst all your hundreds of tools that you might have in your IT environments, how much is really cognitive enabled? What are you doing in terms of intelligent response to service desk inquiries, auto-diagnosing, auto-troubleshooting, auto-repairing problems with infrastructure, auto-correlating events, and so forth? Let me skip to the bottom for just a minute, and then I'll point out a couple of things here that I think are of interest, and then we'll go to the next slide for some concrete examples. Everybody talks about big data. So big data is a topic of the day, and there's no question big data can be helpful. But the right question to ask really is, what data do I really need? Some of the problems we see in clients is not just having data, but really having good, clean, usable data. Okay, so you could actually have a small data set and run a cognitive application and be quite successful. The question that I always encourage clients to ask is, what data do I need? How clean do I need it to be? If it's not clean, how do I cleanse it? And then how do I make it usable? And it can be big, it can be small, it can be a data lake, a data ocean, data puddle, whatever the latest term is, but it needs to be the right and the clean data. And just one more example here under collaboration. I'm not trying to skip R&D, but I'm going to go on to the next slide and talk about that in a moment. But collaboration is also very important. I know a lot of our clients have adopted collaboration tools, and the benefit is obvious, right? Greater collaboration, greater thoughtfulness on things, greater sharing, hopefully a better output, faster and a higher level of quality and sophistication that would render greater results for the business. All that generally is true, and you can see there's a number of opportunities under collaboration that can be leveraged. Let me go to the next slide and just talk about some examples for a moment. I touched on a few of these, so I'll skip around a little bit and talk about some specific examples that I haven't mentioned. Customer service. So customer service is a great one. I know in this industry, this is one of the challenges of any industry, but in particular this industry, there's regulation, there's confidentiality of data and privacy concerns, there's testing of drugs and other things with the public where the results have to be very protected. There's long cycles. So customer service and the responsiveness to customers is paramount, right? And so, we get a lot of data in. How do we respond? How do we provide the right response to our customers? A lot of it's unstructured, maybe unconnected. How do we automate that? So bots is one way, as you can see here. Chatbots is another. You can see to the right. How can we set up chatbots? So there is, as with anything, there's 80-20 rules. If we do a Pareto analysis of the kind of inquiries we get, we can analyze typically, well, there's some 20% that are going to take up 80% of the resource, right? Maybe it's 75-25, maybe it's 85-10, but there's some commonality here. Well, chatbots are great if we have access to the data, if we can set those up, as many companies have, to be responsive to inquiries that come in. Just skipping around again, talk about invoice processing for a minute, because there are some advances being made here. A lot of the major vendors have come out in recent years with advances in their character recognition. There's been advances in, for example, self-classification of documents. Instead of setting up templates, there's advances in recognizing handwriting, as well as block printing, or as well as just typed kind of letters. There's also advances in using machine learning to recognize letters and recognize content, so it doesn't have to be tagged, if you will, over and over again by humans and recognized manually by the system. So that's an area that's coming into its own nicely. It's moved beyond invoice processing, by the way. There's lots of applications for other types of standard forms in insurance, in the industry, in legal contracts, in standard paperwork. I know in this industry there's a lot of data that's collected on forms. It's a great opportunity to use ICR, intelligent character recognition, to convert that image or unstructured data into structure. Last thing I'll point out here, I think, on this slide is just a continuation of that conversation in the billing side. So there's tools that are coming out, particularly in the cognitive space, that'll help us identify anomalies and irregularities in data. So it's mentioned here on the slide about fraud, waste, and abuse. There's a couple of tools that are machine learning oriented. They use inference models and other platforms to read the data in unstructured data, as well as structured databases, and then discover the anomalies in the trends and patterns in the data. And that can be very helpful. What we would typically do if we were in IT, and part of my background is in IT, is we write a report. We've got to specify the database, the fields, the columns, the conditions we're looking for. The benefit of some of these tools is you don't have to specify that. It's almost a matter of telling it which data to look at, letting it read the data, and then let it go through its own discovery process and raise to us what it finds. And then we can filter through and make sense of it along with the machine. So these are all technologies that are coming. As one last slide to conclude this section, and it's a slide that I thought would be appropriate, is how to think about these technologies. So if I was in the shoes of many of our clients, and I have been in the past, I've been a client before I was in consulting, I think, well, how do I make sense of all this? And so this is just a little model to think about these technologies. There is the human aspect, how engaged are the humans, and then there's, how learning and non-learning, how adaptive and hardwired are these applications. And so if you look over on the bottom right, automated intelligence, this is the basic, no human involved, hardened, very routine, scripted. That's RPA. That's robotic process automation. And on the upper left is the direct opposite, which is tools that are very machine learning oriented. There may be an inference model, as I mentioned, that can look at data and raise issues and escalations and create visibility to activities that can help us make better decisions. At this point, Jen, do we want to stop and do one more survey question?
No, we'll jump into our audience questions next.
Okay, audience questions. Is that Chris?
Yeah, great. Thanks. It's been an outstanding session. We do have some questions from the listeners. If we don't get to your question during this webinar, we will follow up with you after the event. When does a company typically start working on its bot vision?
So, Jen, I can take that one. You know, it varies, and some think about it up front when they start their journey, but the truth is that in most cases, companies don't always know the right questions to ask. And because there's an evolution, there's a learning that goes along with the journey in this type of automation. And so in many cases, clients start their journey by dabbling in or starting in bot 1.0 with RPA. And they begin to then see the potential. Then they begin to think about, well, gee, where should I really take this? Where is this going to go? How do I create an approach or a strategy that gives me the direction enough to understand what the vision might be, but then the flexibility and the means to get there, recognizing the unique and critical nuances and requirements of my company and my industry. That's really the strategy puzzle, right? Do I know where I'm going? Can I define it? Then how do I get there? And how do I create an approach, not a fixed plan, but an approach that gives me guidance on resources and strategies, how I look at products, where I deploy this, so I can get to my goals. And of course, it's dynamic, right? You know, it needs to be updated from time to time. And Chris, what I might do, because I'm watching the time here a little bit, is let me just delve into the next section and zip through a couple of slides that are relevant to that question, and then we'll come back at the end for the remaining questions. So, question is, how do I get there? And on page, you can see the pages up there now, page 24. This just is a digital framework. It's a little bit of a meter that shows where we're going to take the company digital. And the next page, the slide I'm showing now, is kind of the roadmap. And this is how we advise clients to do it. First, you have to understand where you are. That sets the baseline for the strategy. Then we define the future state. And this is a very collaborative, questioning type of an activity where we try to pound out, well, what do we think the future of our business looks like at this point in time? And the last point is, how do we get there? Okay, and so we're going to look at, things like technologies we need, what does the organization need to look like, governance, and so forth. And of course, financials is very important to that. If I look at the next slide, just a couple of slides now to dig deep into this. Some thought starters. Where do I start, and how do I connect this all together? Well, we like to start clients thinking about what are the goals and drivers of strategy, right? What are the business drivers? What are the technology drivers? What are the market drivers? And what are the automation management drivers? If we can understand those, that's a great starting point to lay out the current state. And we have to connect those to things like the baseline, governance. Where are we on governance? How do we create alignment? What's the architecture that we're dealing with? How do we mobilize for change? So all these questions come up during the course of a strategy assignment, which of course leads me to the next page, which has a little bit of a complicated image, but it does show a lot of the elements required to get from vision to implementation. And that's really the key. If we can get a good vision, capture that, then we can figure out how do we go about achieving that vision. What I like about this slide is it shows a lot of the various parameters and elements of that. Not all of them are relevant to every particular strategy exercise, but we do have to ask the question so we can get some information, some data points on the particular company environment. And if I go a little bit more, now if I take you out a little bit beyond that, and I start thinking about bot 3.0, the target state, what does it look like? How do we define that? And there are, again, similar elements that run threads through all of this. our objective with every client is to help them think this through a little bit, because the next step is going to be, how do I get there? You can see, by the way, in the bottom right of this slide, just a quick survey of our own clients, each dot not necessarily representing a client, but it could be more than one. You can see that it's a little bit of a bell curve, right? Some clients are definitely thinking about strategy, or they're in the strategy exercise about this. Some are that's the far right. Some are on the far left. They're not even thinking about it so early. They don't even know the right questions to ask. Many are in the middle, right? They're thinking about, which is the question that was asked earlier, I'm considering it, do I need it, how valuable is it, how can it help me, and so forth and so on. So how can it help you? Well, here's one great example, which is organizational change management. As automations are deployed, they impact who? People's jobs. They also impact the technology and the economics of the business. There's a lot of impacts. But the people, when I think about organizational change management, when we do here at ISG, we think about these elements. How do I help take the organization and the people in the organization along that journey? There's some elements in it. There's strategy and governance, of course, but there's managing the expectations of the stakeholders. How do I communicate with them? Right? What's the right messaging? What's the right avenues for messaging? What are the right messages to craft? How do I deploy them and create and deliver them? How do I align the organization? How do I think about the post-automation organizational structure, organization and staffing, for example? How do I align that, match that to the organizations? How do I think that through based on what others have done and how these technologies work? How do I think through adoption and training? And of course, in the end, what's the impact on performance metrics? Do the metrics I have in the organization around my people and my processes need to change? And the reason that matters is on this slide, because as you can see in our own research, 62% of respondents say that people are a major issue. And it's true. If you think about what's happening here, we're automating the work of people. People's work is going to an automation, some kind of bot. Their job may not be going away, but they're giving their work up to somebody else. That's giving something away. It impacts them. How do we deal with that? How do we get ahead of it? Something else just real quick, and I'll zip through this a little bit, Jen, as well. There are some design principles around what we do when we think about .3.0. They're here. Governance is a major issue. How do I govern this? It's another data element in the strategy model. And last but not least, the challenges that are upcoming. And this is all about, by the way, scaling. So an important part of BOT 3.0 is, how do I scale this across the enterprise? I may have a lot of automations. How do I connect them up? What does my connection mesh look like of automations? And then how do I push this out to optimize my investment? And these are just some of the lessons learned. So what I want to do at this point is, first, thank you for listening, and I'll turn it back over to Chris. I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, we're running up against the hour, but we do have a couple more, and as a reminder, if we don't get to your questions, we'll follow up with an email. Who do you usually see leading the vision process?
Well, I can start that one, but I'll turn it over to Fran. I think we see it in a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 places typically. A lot of times it's somebody in the back office in shared services that has the need. There's a drive to cut costs. They get into automation. They discover and learn about it, and they're like, well, where can we take this? A lot of times it's in the financial side of the house. Finance may have responsibility for that, but they're driving the financial side. Other times, though, it's in senior management and operations. They're here. They're getting pounded left and right by automation. What is it? Why are you using it? How much are you using it? Where are you using it? Why are you using it? And so they're beginning to start that conversation at the executive level. Fran, what do you think?
So I agree with all of the above, and the one thing that I would add that we're seeing in some of our drug development clients is it's starting in an innovation function. So that focus on process improvement is often leading people to look at where automation can contribute.
Chris, any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple more. I don't know if we'll have time. I'll read off 2, and you can decide if one might need to be answered in a follow-up email. What preparations do they need to make? And then, about how long does it take to, develop that bot vision?
So I'll knock those off real quick for everybody's benefit, and then we can put something into a follow-up. What preparations? This is a project, right? So, and to do it well requires organizational buy-in and alignment. getting the right stakeholders involved, getting executive support, and making sure that people can contribute the time to give their thoughts and put their best thoughtfulness onto it. You know, a lot of times when we do this work, we can't gather everything in a day. People have to digest and think about this. So there's phases of engagement. There's a pre-launch where information is provided ahead of time. People can digest it and think about it. There's obviously workshops and interviews, and then there's the validation and verification of the data, and then the synthesis of it and putting it together in the strategy and so forth. In terms of how long it takes, it really varies. We have clients where we've looked at this and we've done, call it 6 weeks or 8 weeks. There's others who take a number of months. But it doesn't have to be a long engagement. It needs to be kept at the right level. And that's, of course, an exercise of judgment between the client and the consultants who have experience with this kind of thing. Fortunately for ISG, we have deep experience in strategy. We do a lot of work with clients in this space. We're very accustomed to helping them stay at the right level and generating useful outputs of strategy. And with that, Chris, I know we're at the top of the hour. I'll hand it back to you to thank everybody and wrap it up.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And that does wrap up today's webinar, Life Science Bot 2.0 and Bot 3.0. Are you ready? As mentioned, the recording of this Smart Talk will be available to share with your colleagues at the same link as the live event. And if you'd like to speak with Mark, Jen, Fran, or any of our ISG advisors, please reach out to us at isg-1.com. Thank you very much for listening to our program today, and have a great day, everybody.